She was 23 and the youngest of 3 daughters. The will had been read out in the small wood-paneled office of a small county attorney in the small Nebraska sandhills town of Halverson Crossing 2 weeks after their father's funeral, and her 2 older sisters had walked out of that office with everything. Lillian, the eldest, had taken the small white-painted clapboard farmhouse on Halverson Lane with the wraparound porch and the deep clean sandhills well. Margaret, the middle sister, had taken the savings account at the Cherry County Bank, $83,000 sealed slow across 40 years of careful living. And Wren, the youngest, had been handed a single folded square of cream cotton paper with 1 line of careful old penmanship and a small brass key on a piece of plain hemp twine, and the line had said only this: "To my Wren, the collapsed grain elevator and the half-acre it stands on at the back end of Halverson Crossing Road." Lillian had laughed soft when she read it aloud. Margaret had only shaken her head. Wren had walked out of the small county attorney's office holding the small brass key in her closed palm and the folded square of cream cotton paper in her jacket pocket, and she had not said a word. Because what nobody knew, least of all Wren Halverson herself, was that pressed flat and sealed in oilcloth beneath the hand-pegged cottonwood floorboards of the small caretaker's room of the half-collapsed elevator, packed inside a hand-built oak chest her father had set down with his own 2 hands across the last 43 years of his life, was something that would change her life forever. Before we go on, if you love stories like these, take a moment and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you are listening from tonight. We love to see how far these stories travel. She had grown up with the smell of cured sandhills hay and slow-stored turkey red wheat. With the deep, clean grass smell of cured Nebraska sandhills hay loaded slow into the long, low cattle barn on a cool October morning, with the dry, sharp smell of seasoned cottonwood coals burning low in the small cast-iron caretaker's stove inside the foot of the elevator on a cold November morning. With the cool, clean smell of fresh hand-cleaned turkey red wheat seed being poured slow from a small wooden grain scoop into a clean glass jar at the long pine work bench, and with the deep, cool dusk smell of the Nebraska sandhills themselves breathing slow off the rolling short grass prairie at the back end of a wide-open Cherry County evening. She had grown up sitting on a low cedar stool inside the small caretaker's room at the foot of the old wooden grain elevator when she was 3 and 4 years old, watching her father's long sun-weathered hands lift a long carved hickory grain probe slow up out of a wooden seed bin, pouring a thin stream of dark amber turkey red wheat seed onto the long pine work bench for sorting, with a slow patience that did not look like work but like listening. Her father was Caleb Halverson, a quiet man who had been the keeper of the old wooden grain elevator at the back end of Halverson Crossing Road for 43 years. Wren had grown up the 3rd daughter in a small white-painted clapboard farmhouse on Halverson Lane with her father Caleb and her mother Mary and her 2 older sisters Lillian and Margaret. Lillian, 6 years older, had been the bright one, the practical one, the one who went off to Lincoln at 18 and came back with a small bookkeeping office in Halverson Crossing and a steady husband and a slow, steady distance from the elevator at the back of town. Margaret, 4 years older, had been the careful one, the one who went off to Omaha at 18 and came back with a small dental hygienist's certificate and a small house on the south side of Halverson Crossing and a careful eye on every dollar. Both of them had loved their father in the careful, steady way the older daughters of quiet men often love their fathers, from a respectful distance, and they had thought of the old wooden elevator at the back of town the way most of Halverson Crossing thought of it, as a half-collapsed wooden relic from a long-gone, short grass prairie wheat country. A thing their father held onto out of pure sandhill stubbornness. But Wren had been the one who had walked the half-mile down Halverson Crossing Road with her father at 4 in the morning all through her growing-up years. She had been the one who had sat on the low cedar stool in the small caretaker's room and watched him lift the wooden hatches of the grain bins. She had been the one her father had quietly taught the trade to from the time she could carry a small wooden grain scoop without spilling. Lillian and Margaret had grown up in the farmhouse on Halverson Lane. Wren had grown up at the foot of the elevator. She learned to tell a hand-cleaned turkey red wheat kernel from a Marquis Spring wheat kernel by the rim of the husk before she could read. By 8, she could lift a long hickory grain probe slow up out of a wooden seed bin in a single even pull without cracking a single husk. By 12, she could read a bin. She could stand at her father's elbow at the open hatch of a wooden grain bin and see, before her father told her, whether a stored bin of saved turkey red wheat seed had 2 more clean months in the cool sandhills dark or 4, whether the slow even draft through the long wooden shaft was holding at the steady 56 degrees the elevator had always held, whether the small living pre-1940 short grass prairie grass cultures in the small glass jars on the back room workbench were running true to the family line. By 18, she had cleaned her own turkey red wheat seed for 4 full sandhills harvests at her father's elbow, sealed 63 small glass jars of saved turkey red wheat seed and pre-1940 native Cherry County short grass prairie grass cultures beneath the cottonwood floorboards in her own hand, and learned every one of the 17 Sandhills line elevator signs her father said a Halverson keeper had to know before she was allowed to seal a jar of her own under her own initials. Her father, on a warm Saturday morning in October in Wren's 18th year, walked out of the small caretaker's room of the elevator with a single small dark glass jar of fresh cleaned turkey red wheat seed and laid it in Wren's hands at the cottonwood doorstep and said, "You are a Halverson keeper now, Wren girl. The grain knows you. The probe knows you. The elevator knows you." And then he said, in his quiet way, "And there is one thing your old daddy has not yet shown you, because the elevator herself had to choose the morning. Come back to the back room with me." But before Wren or her father, there had been Obadiah. Obadiah Halverson had come up the Platte River Road from Council Bluffs in a small canvas-covered wagon in the spring of 1895. 28 years old, with his young wife Hannah, a small wooden trunk holding everything they owned, a single oilcloth-wrapped bundle holding the carved hickory grain probe his father had handed him at the Iowa farmhouse step, a small leather pouch of saved turkey red wheat seed his father had carried out of a small Volga German farm in southern Russia in 1878, a small earthen crock of dried shortgrass prairie grass cuttings, and the rough plans for a small wooden plains grain elevator his father had drawn out on a piece of brown butcher paper. The Halversons had stopped at a low rise on the back end of a small Cherry County township crossroad because the rolling shortgrass prairie ran deep in gold the way the Volga steppe had run, and a small clear branch came down off the back ridge clean and cool over rounded fieldstones, and Obadiah had stood at the foot of the low rise on a warm July afternoon, and he had said to Hannah, in the slow, careful Volga German English he was still learning, "This is the place. The elevator belongs here." He and Hannah built the small wooden grain elevator through the spring and summer of 1896, hand-shaping the squared cottonwood corner posts, hand-pegging the cottonwood floorboards of the small caretaker's room, raising the long vertical wooden shaft 40 feet tall with hand-cut cottonwood clapboard, fitting 4 wooden grain bins of cottonwood plank, building a long pinework bench down the back wall, and hanging a small hand-built oak door on hand-forged iron strap hinges. Obadiah cleaned his first bushel of fresh turkey red wheat seed on the long pinework bench in October of 1896. He kept the elevator for 39 winters. He trained his son Solomon at his side, and Solomon trained his son Caleb, and the small wooden grain elevator at the back end of Halverson Crossing Road held its grain probe and its keepers without a single empty harvest for 129 years, until the spring of 2024, when the long vertical wooden shaft finally gave way in a hard April Sandhills hailstorm, and the upper 20 feet of the shaft collapsed slow and patient down across the south. Clapboard in the elevator was declared a total loss by the Cherry County assessor and condemned for demolition by the small Halverson Crossing Town Board. Her father had 3 rules for the elevator. The first was this: the grain is the teacher. You do not save the seed, Wren girl. The dry, cool sandhills dark of the long vertical wooden shaft and the slow, steady 56-degree draft through the cottonwood clapboard save the seed, and you only stand at the open hatch of a wooden grain bin with a hickory probe in your hands, and you read what the grain is telling you, and you do what it is asking. The second was this: the elevator is the keeper. A keeper who thinks he saves the family seed in a kitchen pantry jar is a keeper who is fooling himself. The elevator is the keeper. The third was this: the seed is the family. The small saved Volga German turkey red wheat seed and the small saved pre-1940 native Cherry County shortgrass prairie grass cultures your great-grandfather carried up the Platte River Road in 1890. 5 have been kept in small clean glass jars under the cottonwood floorboards for 129 years, never once gone soft, never once gone foul. Mind the seed above the other 2, Wren girl. The clapboard can be relaid. The probe can be rubbed with beeswax. The shaft can be rebuilt. The seed cannot be replaced. Her father died in late August of 2025 on a hot, dry afternoon in his chair on the small wraparound porch of the farmhouse on Halverson Lane, with the open-thumbed grain book in his lap and a small earthen crock of cool, clean Sandhills well water on the side table beside him. The doctor said it had been his heart, slow and patient. Wren was 23. She did not cry. She came home from her shift at the small Halverson Crossing Feed and Seed Co-op and found her father in the porch chair, and she sat down on the wooden porch floor beside the chair and laid her cheek against her father's cool sun-weathered hand. And she stayed there until her sister Lillian arrived. She refreshed the prairie grass cultures herself that night, alone, with a small ladle of cool, clean Sandhills well water she had drawn off the deep, clean well in her own careful young hand. And only when the crock was set back on the cool corner of the kitchen counter did she sit down beside the cold wood stove and finally let herself cry. 2 weeks after the funeral, Lillian and Margaret had sat with Wren in the small wood-paneled office of the small county attorney, Mr. Howard Pelletier of Halverson Crossing, and the will had been read out plain. Lillian had taken the farmhouse on Halverson Lane. Margaret had taken the $83,000 in the Cherry County Bank, and Wren had been handed the small brass key and the single folded square of cream cotton paper. "There you go, Wren," Lillian had said, not unkindly. "Dad always did love that old wooden wreck more than was reasonable. Maybe he wanted you to have it because he knew you wouldn't sell it." The 2 older sisters had walked out of the small office that morning satisfied. They had split everything down the middle, and they had handed Wren the one thing nobody else had wanted. They had thought it kindness. It was their mistake. If these stories are reaching you tonight, take a second to subscribe. It truly does help us keep making them. And tell us in the comments, was there ever a quiet thing your family kept for so long they forgot what it was worth? Wren walked out of the small county attorney's office that morning, and she walked the half-mile down Halverson Crossing Road in the slow gold late summer Sandhills light. The deep red big bluestem and the deep gold sand bluestem were turning bronze along the rolling ridges. A small clear branch came down off the back rise clean and cool over rounded fieldstones along the right of the road. She found the foundation of the small caretaker's cottage first, 3 courses of fieldstone in a square of new switchgrass. And beyond the foundation, set on the low rise under the open arc of a wide sandhills sky, the old wooden grain elevator. 40 feet tall at the long vertical wooden shaft, 20 feet collapsed slow and patient down across the south clapboard from the hard April sandhills hailstorm, the upper half of the shaft folded down sideways in long ribbons of silvered cottonwood plank, the lower 20 feet still rising tall above the small, low caretaker's room at the foot. The hand-cut cottonwood clapboard silvered and split along the south face by 129 winters of sandhills wind, the small hand-built oak door at the south face still upright and warped on hand-forged iron strap hinges rusted dark. 129 autumns of dry switchgrass banked deep against the cottonwood doorstep. She did not cry. She brushed the dry switchgrass from the cottonwood doorstep with her boot, fitted the small brass key into the small hand-forged brass lock plate, worked the key gently for the better part of 2 minutes until the wards remembered how to turn. And then the bolt slid back with a small dry sound, and the small hand-built oak door eased open on its iron hinges with the slow groan of a door that has held shut since the April collapse. The cool, dry breath of the small caretaker's room came out to meet her, the dim, warm cottonwood and grain smell of oiled hickory and old beeswax, and the faint, sharp ghost of 129 years of dry, clean, turkey-red wheat seed. She stood at the door a long minute. Then she lit her father's small brass kerosene lantern, the one he had kept on the long pine workbench for 43 years, and she stepped into the small caretaker's room at the foot of the half-collapsed elevator. The small caretaker's room was 20 feet of slow, dim cottonwood warm air. A small cast-iron caretaker's stove against the south wall with a small bundle of dry cottonwood kindling still laid in its firebox, a long pine workbench running down the back wall, a small grain probe rack hung above the bench with 3 hand-carved hickory grain probes still in the rack gone dark with age. A small wooden grain scoop, hand-shaped of cottonwood, still resting on the workbench where her father had set it down in the last August he had walked out of the elevator. A small hand-painted square of cream cotton cloth tacked above the workbench in her father's careful old penmanship reading, "Keep the seed cool, keep the lid sealed, keep the line clean." For a long minute she stood there and she thought about the demolition order. The town board had condemned the elevator for demolition in April, and a small county demolition contract had already been let to a small Halverson Crossing earth mover named Roy Hatch to flatten the half-collapsed shaft to the foundation by the 1st of November. Wren had 38 days. She had $4.70 in the inside pocket of her jacket, a small canvas duffel of her clothes back at Lillian's farmhouse, and no place of her own to go. She had set her open palm flat on the long pine workbench. She had closed her eyes. And then she had remembered, very clearly, a thing her father had said one summer afternoon over coffee at the kitchen table on Halverson Lane when she was 16. "The good Halverson elevators, Wren girl," he had said. "We keep what is dearest pressed in oilcloth and packed in a hand-built oak chest beneath the second-hand pegged cottonwood floorboard from the long pine work bench in the cool oak dark of the caretaker's room storage pit. Because oak holds glass and seed against damp, and the slow sandhills frost better than any cellar in any farmhouse. And no thief who has never lifted a long hickory grain probe slow up out of a wooden seed bin at first light in a cold November sandhills dawn would think to lift the cottonwood floorboards of a half-collapsed wooden grain elevator and look for what a Halverson keeper has set down there." Wren knelt slowly on the worn cottonwood plank floor in front of the long pine work bench. She lifted the second-hand pegged cottonwood floorboard from the workbench, the one her father had loosened on his own hand a long time before. Beneath the floorboard, set into a shallow hollow of dry sandhills sand, sealed in a long dark oilcloth bundle tied with weathered hemp twine, lay the oak chest. She lifted it out carefully. It was heavier than she had expected. She set the chest on the long pinework bench and untied the hemp twine of the oilcloth slow with her fingers, and she opened the oilcloth fold by fold, and inside, the hand-built oak chest, the lid carved on its top with 3 small joined letter H's, one for Obadiah, one for Solomon, and one for Caleb. She lifted the lid. And inside, packed in a thin bed of dry sandhill sand and dry oak shavings, lay the jars. 63 of them. Small clean glass jars sealed with hand-pressed beeswax and cotton cloth lids tied with linen string. Some holding small, careful suspensions of saved Volga German turkey red wheat seed and deep red amber dry grain. Some holding small, careful suspensions of saved pre-1940 native Cherry County shortgrass prairie grass cultures in pale gold dry grass and sand. Each jar with a small slip of waxed paper tied to it, with linen string carrying the year and the line and the keeper's full name. Obadiah, Volga German turkey red wheat 1896 first jar. Obadiah, Cherry County shortgrass prairie culture 1899. Solomon, Volga German turkey red wheat 1928 first jar under his own initials. Solomon, pre-1940 sand bluestem culture 1936. Caleb, Volga German turkey red wheat 1965 first jar under his own initials. Sealed at 18. Caleb, Volga German turkey red wheat, August 2025, the last jar her father had sealed in the caretaker's room storage pit the morning of the day he had died, the wax still soft when she pressed it with her thumb. The slow Sandhills line elevator keeping of 3 generations of Halverson men. Sealed in glass and dry sandhills sand in a hand-built oak chest beneath the cottonwood floorboards of a half-collapsed wooden grain elevator for 129 years. Beneath the jars, in the cool oak dark of the chest, lay a small flat tin box with a hinged lid and a small leather pouch. Wren lifted the tin. Inside was the original grain book, thick, sewn together with linen thread, the cover of soft-tanned oilskin, the pages of cotton paper hand-cut and hand-ruled, and on every page, in the careful old hands of 3 generations of Halverson keepers, was the whole record of the elevator. Page after page after page, 129 years of careful Sandhills line-keeping. Inside the small leather pouch lay 17 small American gold coins, $5 pieces from the 1870s and 80s. The gold Obadiah had carried up the Platte River Road in the canvas wagon. And folded into the back of the grain book, sealed with a drop of warm, dark beeswax gone hard as amber, was a single letter, the wax still whole, addressed in long, careful old Volga German-tinged penmanship to the daughter or son who lifts the floorboard. From Obadiah Halverson, Cornter, Halverson Crossing, 1897. And tucked beneath it, sealed with a fresher amber soft drop of beeswax, was a second letter, the wax still soft to the thumb, addressed in her father's careful hand to Wren. From Dad, the 1st of August, 2025. She broke the older wax seal first with her thumb, and she read the founder's letter aloud to the dim cottonwood and grain hold. To the daughter or son who lifts the floorboard. If you are reading this, you have walked down Halverson Crossing Road with a key in your hand, and you have brushed the switchgrass from the cottonwood doorstep, and you have turned the bolt, and you have lit a lantern in the dim, and you have known to kneel at the long pine work bench and lift the second cottonwood, floorboard, and you are a Halverson keeper, and the elevator has called you home. My name is Obadiah Halverson. I came across the ocean with my father in the autumn of 1878, and we homesteaded in southwest Iowa in the spring of 1879, and my father taught me the trade on the small Iowa farm for 15 years before I came west with my Hannah in the spring of 1895. I stood at the foot of this low rise on a warm July afternoon, and I knew, the way a man knows a thing once and keeps it for 40 years, that the elevator was here. The jars in the oak chest below this letter, daughter, are not money. They are not gold. They are the family. The Volga German turkey red wheat seed and the pre-1940 native Cherry County shortgrass prairie grass cultures, dry cleaned once with a careful Halverson hand and sealed once in glass, are the family kept in oak and sandhill sand and the slow, short grass dark. Do not move the jars. Do not unseal the wax lids unless you mean to plant the seed in a clean sandhills field. Lift one jar to the Unl plant genetics researcher who comes asking after pre-Green Revolution Volga German turkey red wheat seed and pre-1940 native Cherry County shortgrass prairie bloodlines. And lay the rest of the jars in the oak chest the way you found them. And close the oak door at sundown the way a Halverson keeper has closed the door of this elevator at sundown for 129 years. With my whole hand and my whole heart, Obadiah Halverson. Cornter, Halverson Crossing, Cherry County, Nebraska, the 14th of October, 1897. She set the founder's letter flat on the long pine workbench. Then she lifted her father's letter, the smaller and softer one, the wax still amber soft to the thumb. And she broke the seal slow, and she read her father's last words aloud to the small caretaker's room. To my Wren. By the time you read this, I am gone. I am writing it on the 1st of August this year, on the long pine work bench in the small caretaker's room, after I sealed the last jar of Volga German turkey, red wheat seed beneath the floorboards in my own hand, because I felt it in my chest this morning and I knew I had this one last clean Sandhill Saturday to set down what your old daddy never said well out loud. Wren girl. Your sisters are good women. They love you in the careful, steady way they were raised to love. They did not walk the half-mile down Halverson Crossing Road with me at 4 a.m. the way you did from the time you were 3. They did not learn to lift the long hickory probe slow up out of a wooden seed bin in a single even pull the way you did at 8. They did not seal a jar of Volga German turkey red wheat seed under their own careful young hand at 18 the way you did. I have left them the farmhouse and the $83,000 because they will sleep well in those things, and they will not understand what is beneath the cottonwood floorboards of the elevator, and it would only worry them to know. I have left you the elevator because you are the only Halverson keeper left in this generation, and the seed is the family, and the elevator is the keeper, and the grain is the teacher, and you already know all three. Mend the collapsed shaft if you can. Sell 5 of the 17 small gold pieces in the leather pouch to a careful coin dealer in O'Neill, a man named Mr. Friedrich Stoltzfus, who will value the lot at $38,400 and put the rest of the gold back in the pouch where you found it, because that gold is for the elevator and not for you. Lift 1 jar to the unplant genetics researcher who will come down the road. Do not move the rest. Keep the seed cool. Keep the lid sealed. Keep the line clean. With my whole hand and my whole heart, your old daddy, Caleb Halverson, the 1st of August, 2025. Wren laid her father's letter flat on the long pine work bench beside the founder's letter. She set her open palm across both letters. She did not cry. She closed her eyes and breathed in the cool cottonwood and grain smell of the small caretaker's room. and the tight thing that had lived in her chest since the hot August afternoon she had walked onto her father's porch and found him quiet in the chair loosened. The name of the loosening was home. She drove the 5 gold pieces up to O'Neill the following Tuesday to the careful coin dealer her father had named, Mr. Friedrich Stoltzfuss, who valued the 17 small $5 gold pieces at $38,400 exactly, just as her father had said. She sold 5 of them. She put $11,000 in a savings account at the Cherry County Bank in her own careful young name. And she walked back down Halverson Crossing Road that warm Tuesday afternoon with a fresh load of hand-cut cottonwood clapboard for the south face, 2 coils of new hemp twine, a fresh cake of beeswax, a small can of new kerosene for her father's lantern, and the careful written estimate of an honest Halverson Crossing carpenter named Mr. Theodore Jansen for the rebuilding of the collapsed upper 20 feet of the long vertical wooden shaft, $21,400, work to begin the morning after the demolition order was rescinded. She walked into the small-town clerk's office on Wednesday morning with the careful written estimate in one hand and the founder's letter and the grain book in the other, and she set them on the counter, and she said, in her quiet way, the demolition is rescinded, the elevator is repaired, the work begins Monday. The small-town clerk, a soft-eyed older Halverson Crossing woman named Mrs. Ingrid Olson, who had known Wren's father, looked at her for a long minute, and then she lifted the demolition file from the cabinet behind her, and she stamped it. In red ink, rescinded, and she said only, "Your old daddy would be proud, Wren." She did not move the jars. The jars stayed where Obadiah and Solomon and Caleb had sealed them, and on the warm Friday afternoon after the rebuild began, an older woman drove down Halverson Crossing Road from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln Plant Genetics Heritage Seed Project, who had been searching for 30 years for surviving pre-Green Revolution Volga German Turkey red wheat bloodlines and pre-1940 native Cherry County shortgrass prairie grass cultures presumed lost since the Dust Bowl, and she stood in the open oak door of the small caretaker's room with her hand against her mouth, looking at the rows of small glass jars under the soft lantern amber on the long pine work bench, and she said, only, "Please, hun. Please let me come back with the lab." Wren lifted 1 jar of Solomon's 1936 pre-1940 sand bluestem culture and 1 jar of Obadiah's 1899 native big bluestem culture and 1 jar of Caleb's 1965 first sealed Volga German Turkey red wheat, and she laid them in the older woman's careful old hands, and she said only, "Dad said you'd come." On the second Sunday of October, Lillian and Margaret drove down Halverson Crossing Road from town for the first time since the funeral, because the small Halverson Crossing town clerk had told them at the post office about the rescinded demolition and the rebuilt shaft, and the older Unnell Plant Genetics researcher who had been driving down the half-mile road from town every Friday afternoon. They parked the small gray sedan at the cottonwood doorstep, and they stood in the open oak door of the small caretaker's room together, the practical sister and the careful sister, and they looked at the rebuilt long vertical wooden shaft rising fresh and pale above the small caretaker's room, and they looked at the long pine work bench with the small brass kerosene lantern and the open-thumbed grain book and the rows of small glass jars laid out for inspection. And Lillian looked at Margaret, and Margaret looked at Lillian. And Lillian said quietly, "Oh, Wren." And Margaret said quietly, "Oh," and Wren did not say anything for a long Sandhills minute. She lifted a small dark glass jar of fresh hand-cleaned turkey red wheat seed from the long pine work bench, and she set it in Lillian's careful older hand. And she lifted a second small dark glass jar of fresh hand-cleaned turkey red wheat seed, and she set it in Margaret's careful older hand. And she said, in her quiet way, "Dad left it to me, because he knew you wouldn't sell it." The two older sisters held the small dark glass jars in their careful older hands for a long warm Sandhills minute, and the warm October light came down soft and gold across the long pinework bench. And the only sound in the small caretaker's room was the slow, patient breath of the wide rolling short grass prairie outside. That is the thing about the elevator keeping our fathers teach us, the slow kind, the kind we learn at a long pinework bench with a carved hickory grain probe when we are 3 years old. It is not really about the bushel. The bushel is the wage. The seed is the trade. The seed is the family. The elevator is the keeper. The grain is the teacher. We are only the next pair of hands, and sometimes a father knows which of his daughters has the hands. And sometimes the sisters who get the house and the money get the comfort, and the daughter who gets the half-collapsed wooden wreck at the back end of a forgotten Sandhills road gets the family. Wren Halverson was 23 years old and the youngest of 3 daughters. Her sisters had taken the small white-painted clapboard farmhouse on Halverson Lane and the $83,000 in the Cherry County Bank, and they had handed her a small brass key on a piece of plain hemp twine and the half-collapsed wooden grain elevator at the back end of Halverson Crossing Road. They had split everything down the middle and they had handed her the one thing nobody wanted. It was their mistake. And it was the best mistake any of them ever made. If this story has kept you company tonight, thank you for sitting up with us. Sleep well, breathe easy, and see you in the last warm light of the day.